SMU political science professor Matthew Wilson, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. So as you know, former President Donald Trump did not take part in the first Republican presidential debate. Instead, he did an interview with Tucker Carlson. What impact do you think his decision will have going forward on the primary and just the rest of the field?
Well, I think he can afford to not be in the debates. He has a huge lead in the Republican primary right now, so I don't think he'll be deeply hurt by his decision not to participate. What it does is open up a little more space for other contenders to make their cases. And that gave an opportunity in the debate for other contenders in the absence of Donald Trump to explain their vision for the party, their vision for America, et cetera. Any event in which Donald Trump participates becomes inevitably about Donald Trump. And when you have a lot of contenders who are trying to break out of the low single digits, they may welcome the absence of the 800-pound gorilla.
But the pressure is on these other candidates, right, to have a breakthrough moment, certainly in the first debate, but then going forward as well. Because if that doesn't happen, what happens to them and how quickly?
Yeah, they have to differentiate themselves from the pack relatively soon. Right now, you've got Trump way out ahead. Then you have Ron DeSantis and surprisingly Vivek Ramaswamy, both polling at around 10 to 15%. And then everybody else is below 5%. And that below 5% pack needs to start sorting itself out. Those people pretty soon are going to have to start emerging from the scrum if they're going to attract significant financial support. They're going to bring donors on board. And in the run up to Iowa, that's what they're going to be trying to do. And they're going to need to resonate with a message that probably distinctively criticizes Joe Biden, because it's been shown that there's not much hay to be made by criticizing Donald Trump in Republican primaries. There's just too much loyalty to Trump among the Republican base.
So how do they separate themselves from Trump if they, if criticizing him doesn't necessarily go over too well? At some point, though, they're in this race because they don't believe that the former president can win in a general election against Biden, right?
Right, or that they believe that they would just be better to win in a general election against Biden, or that they'd be a better president. But what they're going to have to signal, all of these contenders, is that while they largely respect and agree with the things that Trump did when he was president, that they are a better, fresher, newer face with less baggage to take on Joe Biden in 2024. Now, they have the advantage of that largely being true. And if they can get that message to resonate with Republican primary voters, then they have a chance to break through. But we've seen in Republican primary after Republican primary that the path is not through attacking Donald Trump. It's tipping the cap to Donald Trump, respecting him for what he's done, but then talking about oneself and explaining why I am the perfect candidate to take on Joe Biden in 2020.
And what do you make of just the state of the race? Because when you look at all the recent polls, Trump is ahead by at least 40 percentage points. DeSantis is second. Ramaswamy has come up as well, being the closest to DeSantis. And so I'm wondering what you make of that. I mean, it seems as if, he's holding on despite the fourth indictment being charged and filed against him.
Well, and he's holding on in the Republican primary, not despite that, but in many ways because of that. That is, the various indictments have strengthened Trump's hand in the Republican primary, because among Republican base, the perception is that Trump is being unjustly persecuted. And every new indictment, every new criminal proceeding by the federal government against Donald Trump simply reinforces that sense of grievance and of sympathy with Trump among the Republican base. So in the wake of the Georgia indictments, his lead over Ron DeSantis in Iowa expanded by 5 points. So the indictments are not hurting him at all, at least yet, among Republican primary voters. And that state of the race right now makes him the runaway front runner, but with the caveat that we are talking about someone in his late 70s with 4 criminal indictments looming over him. So it certainly does give the others reasons to stick around.
I was going to ask you about that because what does it say about the other candidates in the field that, aside from DeSantis and in some polls Ramaswamy, everybody is in the single digits. So what does this say about the rest of the field? On one hand, it's early in the
Mhm.
process. I mean, but on the other hand, the trends are the trends.
Right. Well, what it says is that largely this race is all about Donald Trump. It's all a referendum on Donald Trump. Do you want him as the standard bearer or not? And only if you say not do you then begin to think about the different alternatives. But in many ways, that becomes an afterthought. Most Republican primary voters do not know anything about most of these people. Most primary voters around the country have only the vaguest notion of who Tim Scott or Nikki Haley or Chris Christie or Asa Hutchinson or any of these people are. We can sometimes tend to exaggerate the level of knowledge about politics that American voters have, but those outside the sort of political pundit class have a relatively limited attention window for politics. And Trump dwarfs everybody else in terms of name recognition. There's considerable fondness for him in the Republican base. And there's an increasing perception that he is being unjustly persecuted and vilified by the Biden administration. And that creates the wagons effect. So it's playing out very well for him.
And what do you make of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis? His campaign has had to change campaign managers. They've had to cut staff. Has this been a surprise to you, given all of the buildup for him joining the race and taking on Trump?
That has been a bit of a surprise because his campaign was so dominant in terms of reelection to the Florida governorship last year. Ron DeSantis has essentially crushed the Democratic Party in Florida. He has made the Republican Party absolutely dominant in what was until very recently a swing state. And that gave him a certain amount of momentum. And early this year, he was polling quite strongly in a lot of surveys against Donald Trump. And that has really receded in part because of the circle the wagons, rally around Trump effect produced by the indictments, but also because DeSantis has struggled to articulate a very clear, coherent message that is the kind of anti-wokeness, anti-Disney crusades. Those only have taken him so far, and he has thus far kind of lacked a comprehensive message about why he's the better choice than Donald Trump. And that's what I think he'll try to articulate tonight to try to get the campaign back on track.
And at some point, though, do the contributors, the big fundraisers, start raising questions? Did I bet on the wrong candidate?
They do. I mean, I don't think we're there yet, but certainly as we get into those early primary states, caucus and primary states, Iowa, New Hampshire, et cetera, if DeSantis does not start to coalesce the non-Trump vote behind himself to a much greater degree than he's polling right now, then I think some of those donors are going to start to lose their enthusiasm.
SMU political science professor Matthew Wilson, thank you as always. We appreciate your insight.
Well, thanks for having me.